When you sit down to make a big decision, you probably think about your options. When you see a wild conspiracy theory on social media, you might wonder if it's legit. These moments of questioning and analyzing are what we call critical thinking, and honestly, it's everywhere in our education system. Teachers push it, employers want it, and basically everyone agrees it's this essential skill we need. But here's the thing, is critically thinking actually as important as we keep saying it is, or have we just gotten caught up with the hype? The answer isn't as straightforward as it seems. There are genuinely good reasons why critical thinking matters so much, but there are also some real problems with how much we've started to emphasize it. Let me break down both sides. First, let's start with the obvious reasons why people say critical thinking is important. First, it actually does help you make better decisions. I mean, think about it. If you're choosing a career, a university, or even just deciding which product to buy, critical thinking helps you weigh the pros and the cons instead of just going with your gut about what everyone else is doing. There's evidence that you look at, you consider multiple perspectives, and you arrive at a more informed choice, which is pretty valuable in real life and not just in school. Beyond decision making, though, critical thinking helps you spot misinformation, which is huge in today's world. We're constantly bombarded with information from social media, news outlets, and random websites. Without critical thinking skills, you'd basically just believe whatever you see first. Critical thinkers, on the other hand, ask questions like, who wrote this? What's their bias? And what evidence supports this claim? In an area of fake news and conspiracy theories, this ability genuinely matters. There's also the creativity angle. It might seem weird that critical thinking and creativity go together, but they really do. When you think critically, you challenge assumptions and question the way things have always been done. This opens up space for new ideas and innovative solutions. A lot of breakthrough innovations come from people who critically examined existing problems and thought differently about them. On a personal level, critical thinking also promotes self-reflection. It helps you understand your own biases, recognizing where you are wrong, and actually grow as a person. In a world where people often stay stuck in their beliefs and refuse to change their minds, having the ability to step back and evaluate yourself is genuinely important. Employers definitely care about this too. When companies look for employees, they're looking for people who can solve problems, think on their feet, and adapt to change. Basically, all the things critical thinking helps you do. So, from a career perspective, developing this skill early makes sense. Now, for the counter argument, this is where things get interesting. Not everyone thinks critical thinking deserves the spotlight it's been given. Some educators and researchers actually argue that we've been pushing it too hard, and that this emphasis comes with some real problems. One major issue is that critical thinking doesn't work well without a solid foundation of knowledge. You can't really evaluate information critically if you don't know anything about the subject you're evaluating. If you're thinking critically about climate change, but you've never learned basic physics or climate science, your critical thinking might just be educated guessing. This is a real problem in schools that emphasize critical thinking skills while cutting back on teaching actual content and foundational knowledge. Students end up learning how to think without having too much to think about. Another criticism is that the emphasis on critical thinking has pushed out other valuable thinking styles, particularly creative thinking. A researcher named Clarice Brutin pointed out that critical thinking is convergent. It tries to determine what's right and then what's wrong about something that already exists. Creative thinking, on the other hand, is divergent, and it tries to create something entirely new. By focusing so hard on critical thinking, we might actually be limiting creativity and innovation because we're training people to evaluate and judge rather than to imagine and create. Where we need to make quick decisions, sitting down to critically analyze every single choice isn't always realistic or helpful, and that kind of causes sometimes critical thinking to be slow and inefficient. Sometimes you just need to trust your instincts or follow established protocols because overthinking everything would literally paralyze you. Not everything deserves a full critical analysis. Sometimes the rules exist for a reason, and blindly questioning everything can actually be counterproductive. Additionally, critical thinking doesn't automatically prevent people from believing false things. Research shows that even highly intelligent, educated people can endorse conspiracy theories and pseudoscientific claims. Critical thinking is one tool among many, but it's not a magic bullet. People can be great at analyzing information when they want to, but then fall back on emotional reasoning or confirmation bias when a topic touches on something they care deeply about. Your critical thinking skills don't mean much if you're not willing to use them honestly. Now, here is the counter argument for those counter arguments. First of all, the criticisms are fair, but they're also not quite the extermination of critical thinking that they seem to be. So, yes, critical thinking requires knowledge, but that's actually an argument for teaching it, not against it. The solution isn't to abandon critical thinking, it's to teach it alongside actual content and foundational knowledge. Schools that do both end up with students who are actually prepared. The problem isn't critical thinking itself, it's the schools that are swinging too far in one direction. And I can actually attest to this. I also happen to go to college schools right now. And right now, our class, we emphasize critical thinking a massive amount, but you're also expected to learn a lot of material alongside it. Now, this is just an anecdote, so don't just take it from me. Now, for the creativity argument, it's true that critical and creative thinking are different, but they're not enemies. You need both. Critical thinking helps you evaluate whether your creative ideas are actually good ones or just weird for the sake of being weird. Countless innovations required both the creative spark and the critical thinking to refine and test those ideas. The real issue is schools that emphasize only one or the other, not critical thinking itself. On the speed issue, yes, not every decision requires deep critical analysis, but critical thinkers also know that. Being a good critical thinker means knowing when to think critically and when to just move forward. It's about judgment, not overthinking everything. And in complex situations, which are increasingly common in modern life, critical thinking is actually essential. The fact that critical thinking doesn't prevent all false beliefs is a fair point, but it's kind of like saying exercise doesn't guarantee perfect health. Sure, someone who exercises regularly can still get sick, but they're still better off than someone who doesn't exercise. Critical thinking reduces your susceptibility to misinformation significantly, even if it's not perfect. But here's my honest take. Yes, critical thinking actually is important, but we've also made it to be a bigger deal than it needs to be in some ways. The problem isn't critical thinking, it's how we've sometimes implemented it at the expense of other valuable skills and knowledge. The sweet spot is probably recognizing that critical thinking is one important skill among many. It matters for making better decisions, avoiding being manipulated, solving complex problems, and living a life where you're actually thinking for yourself rather than just following along. But it's not just a replacement for creativity, intuition, knowledge, or action. You need all of those things. It's also not something everyone needs to develop at the same degree. A surgeon and a poet might need different ratios of critical thinking to other skills. But for basically everyone living in a modern society with access to overwhelming amounts of information and constant decisions to make, having some solid critical thinking skills is valuable. The real issue is that critical thinking is important, but it's not a cure-all. It's not going to solve all your problems or make you right about everything. It's just a tool that, when combined with knowledge, creativity, experience, and good judgment, it helps you navigate the world a bit better than you would without it. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this kind of video. Please leave a like and subscribe only if you enjoyed the video, and I hope you guys have a good day. Goodbye.